Okay, welcome everybody. As usual, because I may have some new folks, I'm just going to go over very quickly the procedures for how to use the chat box. All of my regulars have figured it out already. So that's me. So what you're going to see, and I still have people coming in, so I may pause for a second as I let them in. So what you're going to see on your screen are these icons in green. This is just a picture of them. What you want to do is select the one that looks like a cartoon bubble. It's next to the phone and what looks like a video screen. And you're going to get a box that looks like this. And you want to put in your name or type here. So if you haven't done it already, please put in your name and where you're from. So as you can see, we have people from all over, at least. Well, actually, Idaho's not the eastern part of the U.S., but actually from throughout the country. So I have a rather ambitious set of stuff to go over with you today. Obviously, this is a little bit different from the other sessions that we did in that it's a soft skill, and I have a PowerPoint presentation. I sent you a copy of it already. And I'll try to get through as much of it as I can. I frequently do this I've certainly done online before, but I do it as an on-site training, so I may describe to you some of the things I do when I do it on-site that don't really lend themselves to being done this way here, but I'll kind of give you the feedback of what I experience when I do it, okay? So let's get started. Let me just say that we who work in I'll say in the service, I have to be generalized here, but who work in school districts, government entities, colleges, particularly on the public side, we need all the friends we can get. There isn't always a presumption of support, and I certainly can talk about this with local school districts. If you don't like a restaurant, you won't go to that restaurant again. But if you don't like your school district, you're not going to move. You're going to become a critic of the district. So our relationships are different, and they tend to be more long-term. And so it's important to always think about every opportunity to maintain good, positive relations with all of our stakeholders, including our internal ones. So what I like to say when I do training on this topic is, while in your professional role, most of you, actually all of you in one way or another, are, on the providing end of the service cycle. You're the ones providing the service. But in most of the rest of your life, you're customers. So many of us have, experiences as customers that kind of give us a sense of what good service is versus poor service. So frequently, again, I said I would kind of describe what I do, because I certainly will take your comments, but what I'll often do if I have a large group is ask people just to chat among themselves and think about an organization that's provided them with great service, and what did they do in particular that you believed reflected good service. So I don't have a problem with people saying, the name of the organization, no reason not to shout out good organizations, but more fundamental to that is what specifically did they do that registered to you as an example of good service. So I will throw that out to you, even though I realize it's not easy for you to chat with each other. You kind of have to do it through the chat box. But if you can give me, an example or a situation, what they specifically did that made you say, wow, that's really good service, okay? And I'm seeing some already. I'm actually going to repeat them because anybody seeing the recording doesn't see the chat box. So I heard Pandora recently gave me an above and beyond service. They followed through. They followed up with the problem. Okay. So the person couldn't do the service. It's a plumber. So he gave us somebody else. So let's see what else we got. And those are really what I'm looking for. Oh, that's actually kind of cool. Yeah. Peloton free memberships. I think their business is going to improve after this. Not that it was doing badly either before. I had been hearing a lot of some of my administrative folks talking about taking up Peloton. I honestly, just a personal comment, I know they have more than just cycling, but I never really dug spin much. It's good cardio, but I always felt like, and I love to bike ride. I just felt like all you do there is drip. so I kind of, oh, thank you, Pam. It's not my thing, but I understand. And I understand they've expanded beyond that. They have yoga and everything else. But anyway, Target gave me good service by providing not only my order correctly, but giving me credit for my full order. Okay, sounds good. So here's what I commonly hear when I get any feedback. Sometimes I have groups that vary. They give me a lot of feedback, some I don't get a lot, in which case usually what I'll do is turn the question the opposite and ask people to give me examples of where they got terrible service and what that looked like, because we can kind of use that as what not to do, okay? So here's my take on it, and see if it encapsulates, in essence, lots of the examples of situations that you described. What I experienced that would be good service is in a situation where people provided good service, whoever is providing the service took ownership of the problem. And let's be honest, most people don't call up because things are going well. They call up because they're having a difficulty of some kind. Because if things are going well, you're just living your life. So what people would say to me is, in an organization that gives good service, they own it. And what do I mean by they own it? They will do things like say, I will look into it. I will follow up with you. I will check on that. In organizations that give poor service, they'll say, you got to do this. You've got to call them. You've got to. So there's no ownership. And it makes no difference who is responsible for the problem. Whether it's our fault or your fault, either way, they try to own and try to solve it. How many of you agree that would be an example of good service? So to encapsulate it, what it is in essence, without breaking down the details, which I'll do later, is in organizations that give good service, they make it easy to be a customer. And in organizations that don't give such good service, they make it hard to be a customer, okay? And in fact, and I'll say, I'm kind of a little ahead of my own slide. Actually, you know what, I'm going to wait. But what I've often said to people is, well, let's talk about just one more thing, too. When I frame the question, what is good service? People will often start by talking about a situation that was in essence a problem. Like I went to a restaurant and they got our orders wrong, or I went to a hotel and there was a mistake. So it got derived on how should I put it? Okay. So it started out with what was in essence a problem, okay? And so I've often said to people, you need to look at the people calling you up with a problem with a different light. I see problems as an opportunity to make a really strong relationship with someone, because somebody's going to remember that one time they had a problem, we really did a lot to try to resolve it. So I would almost say you can actually have that person have a higher view of you than if there had never been a problem at all. So I'll just tell you, a personal experience with this, and many of us have these. So I don't travel as much as I used to. I used to travel really a lot. And I remember going to a hotel in Cleveland. It was late because I had just come in off a flight. I had training in the morning. And I certainly don't fault people for things breaking. I mean, obviously, if you go to a place and a lot of things are broken, that's another story. But, it has to break at some point, and so it's statistical. So I come into the hotel, and after I get settled in, I realize the heat's not working, okay? So I call down to the front desk, and quite frankly, I didn't want them to fix it, that late at night. They got some staff to move me to another room. They actually upgraded me. And the next morning, when I checked out, they told me the room's on us for it, for the inconvenience. So my view of that hotel is, wow, that's a great hotel, okay? They were very responsive, and, and they were understanding of the situation for me. They helped me. So when I'm thinking about booking a hotel next time, you can bet that's the first hotel I want to stay in. Now, had everything gone right, I might have thought the hotel was okay. But because I had a problem, I actually think they're even better than I might have thought of them if there was no problem. Now, I'm not suggesting we should make mistakes just so we have an opportunity to show what we do when we fix them. Trust me, enough of them will happen anyway. However, I like to think of a problem as a potential opportunity to really build a lasting relationship with a friend, as opposed to another person with a difficulty. So, so one of the things that I'm kind of a little limited here is I can't, especially if I'm going to upload to YouTube because of rules and copyright rules, I can't show you the video that this is associated with. But anybody guess what this is? You may be dating yourself. Okay? All right? We'll see if anybody picks up what it is. Okay? What that's a picture of. Correct. It's from Seinfeld. It's the soup Nazi. Okay? Okay. So anyway, so my question is this. If they're treated so badly, why do they go? Why do they go? Okay. Exactly. No soup for you. So why do they go? Okay. Exactly correct, Mandy. Because the soup's good. Okay. Well, that's probably somewhat true, but I think it's the good soup. Okay. So there's, so sometimes you can get, we can have a situation where the product is good, the objective product is good, but the way you're treated is bad, okay? And people may put up with that because the product is good, but it's only a matter of time before someone's going to turn around who can give good soup and treat you well, and it's not going to work for you. But I do want to make a distinction between the objective process of producing good soup and the feeling of being treated badly. Because I've had organizations where when it came to the actual job, they did a good job, but they just seemed to eat your heart out or make it a torturous experience to do it. How many of you have had that experience? Okay? So a very common question that I will frame when I'm working with a department, and it's always important not to get into denial about this stuff, but to accept reality for what it is, because that's the only way you can fix stuff. And it may very well be that the reputation you have is not really about you. It could have been about the history. So I have gone into departments, I particularly work with tech departments or some other departments, and they have a terrible reputation. But that reputation is not really about anybody who's there now. It's all about people who've moved on, and yet we're still straddled with a little bit of that reputation. And then my job is to figure out how to turn around the perception. And I will say this. First, you have to produce good soup. So I can't improve the perception if you really are still lousy. However, if you've turned a corner and you're giving good service, and yet you still feel like, you're behind the eight ball because people judge you based on what happened before, then I do have strategies that I think can help turn it around. It's not an instant thing like instant soup, but you can do it. But the most fundamental question to ask, that's the framing question, is when someone has a problem, do they look forward to or dread contacting your department? I'm not asking you for an opinion about your own departments. I don't even want you to put that up. What I really want you to think about is why they would look forward to calling you in one case and dread it in another. And understand, this is the first time you've heard me do what I would call like a soft skill topic. I really do believe if you get the right question, the answers are there for you. The questions are more important than the answers. The answers come. But if you don't have the right question, okay, then you can't fix things. So the question is, why would they look for? We'll start with why would they look forward to calling you, okay? So anyone want to take a stab at that? Why might they look forward to calling you? Correct. Okay, because in the past, when they had called, you had helped them with the problem, and you didn't, break their chops about it. So they had in the back of their mind a positive experience associated with their prior contact with you. Okay? So the way I sometimes describe it is, as the people are dialing your number, they're getting calmer just by the fact that they have in the back of their mind that you're going to help them. So it's understandable that under those circumstances, in most cases, their demeanor is going to be very positive. They're not going to be belligerent because they're already feeling good just reaching you. Okay? And that's all things being equal. Obviously, if there's a real emergency, people sometimes get frantic, but overall, their demeanor towards you is probably going to be positive because they're expecting you to help them. Now, why would they dread calling? Okay? That's the question. Which doesn't mean that they wouldn't necessarily have to call, because in some cases you're the only game in town. Okay? Particularly if it's an internal customer situation. So again, I'm not talking about any one of your organizations. We're talking in general terms. Not that these situations don't exist. But let's say we had a department that did, we absolutely had the contact, an HR department or a tech department, and just in the past, it was such an awful experience. But we have no choice because they're the people, the only ones we can go to. Okay? So, or they're going to lecture us, they're going to demean us, insult us, or make us feel as if they're put upon by the fact that we need them. Okay? So in those cases, how are they feeling when they're dialing the phone? They're probably like their tempers rate, their heart rate's going up, and they're already annoyed. And then it shouldn't be surprising, or they've gotten a runaround. It's been not an easy experience for them. Then by the time they finally reach you, they're loaded for bear. Okay, so I've often said, if you look at any one individual customer, it's statistical. Some people are very calm. Some people are just, a little off the wall. But if you're seeing a situation where almost all your customers are belligerent, there's a piece of your role in that that you need to look at, okay? And again, it could be historical, so it could be nothing that we're doing, but I just ask, particularly for new leaders, to take a look at that and then say what might have been the drivers. And, and I want to make a point about this in general. People judge all events based on past experience. So I'd like to give a hypothetical to prove that point, although I'm not necessarily saying any of you would dispute that, but let me give you an example that just drives it home, okay? So how many of you have a a friend who is really good about being on time, always on time, just that kind of person. They tell you they're going to meet you at 5, they're there, okay? All right. Good. Okay. Anybody know anybody who's the opposite? They're like notoriously late. like, you know, if, yeah. Okay. All right. So now let's look at a situation. We're supposed to meet someone at 5 o'clock, and it's now, 5:15. And we're talking about the first person, the person who's always on time, and they're not there. So what's your first reaction to that? Oh my goodness, I hope nothing happened, right? So let's assume it was the second person. You're going to worry about him, absolutely. So let's assume it was the second person. You're probably going to say, exactly as Deborah said, oh, here we go again, okay? So what I'm trying to point out is the objective event was the same in both cases. The person was supposed to meet you at 5 and then not there by 5:15. But how you judged it was all a function of what you perceived would be a predictable thing based on prior experience. And that is why I've often heard from some folks who are really trying to turn things around. I feel like our customers just were behind the 8 ball. We can't, they'll blame us for everything, even trivial things that are beyond our control. And I said, because already they have that history. So we're going to have to think about how to change that. I'm not going to just throw that at you and not give you a tip. So if you are going to convince people that you're new and improved, they have to be able to see it in some way. So I've said to people, change your look, change your logo, change the way you answer the phone, change the way you respond to people, so that people have something to register that is a difference. It's a difference. And then at that point, you better back it up, because it isn't enough to say we're changed if you don't then really go the extra mile to prove it. But just going the extra mile without having something for people to register at, sometimes they won't pick it up. So I'm going to tell you a story that's it's going to seem completely off the topic, but it's not, okay? And it's a bit of an odd story, but I'll share it with an industry story, okay? So, and it's about, of all things, cat litter, okay? All right, so everybody, everybody's got to figure out a different angle as to how they're going to sell their particular brand of cat litter. And so there's one particular company, they came up with this idea that as the cat steps on the litter, here's the thing, let me just back it up a bit too, and I hope you don't mind my rambling stories, but I hope they're helpful. But anyway, so I'm a cat lover. I love cats. I have 2. But anybody who has cats, unless you really let them out all the time, that one of the side negatives with cats are litter boxes. You have to have litter boxes, okay? And what does everybody want? They want unstinky litter boxes, okay? That's what they want. They want cats, then unstinky litter boxes. Makes sense, okay? So a lot of the pitch is that the box won't be stinky, okay? So this company came up with this idea that as the cat steps on the litter, it releases the fragrance, and therefore you don't get a stinky litter box. And so the company, and a lot of the companies promote their litter as, not being stinky, but this was their particular gig, that they step on it, okay? And in fact, they decided to name the product Fresh Step. Has anybody ever heard of it? Okay, all right, which makes sense, right? Because, that's the marketing. Okay, so they initially did this, and it did not sell. It didn't work. People didn't believe it. Why would they believe it? So they just didn't believe it, okay? So one of the guys that was in engineering said, here's the problem. We're telling them it, but they can't see it. They can't register it, right? So he came up with this idea. He said, what if we took 10%, 15% of the litter which is a homogeneous product, okay? And we colored it darker green. We're not going to say that that's where the fragrance comes from. We're just going to color a part of it darker green, and we're going to mix it in, right? So now people see it. They actually, I was going to call it flavor crystals, but it doesn't sound like a good example. But they can actually see this difference. You know, it looks different from other litter, and it looks like that's what the cat's stepping on, and that's producing the result. So they did that, and then sales went up. Okay? All right? And I don't know if any of you use it, but if you've ever seen it, a portion of the product, it's got green, darker green, along with the gray. Okay? I will tell you the products are homogeneous. It's just a coloring. However, it's a proof of what I'm talking about, which is that if you're going to differentiate and say you're different, people have to see some example of it. Okay? So I don't know if that made sense to anybody. If it did, just say yes. Okay? And this kind of goes to my next piece here. You know, if you're really going to understand customers, you have to be able to walk in their shoes. You have to imagine what it's like to be them. You know, what it's like to be confused, you know, not familiar with procedures. And the more you can really understand the customer, the more you can adapt the way you communicate with them in ways that are going to be helpful. Now, it doesn't mean we're going to break rules by walking in people's shoes, but if I understand that people are nervous about something by nature, then I can try to calm them down more if I understand it. So the better you understand your customers, how they see the universe, the better off you're going to do. So far we've been talking, and I titled this, you know, Strategies for Exceptional Customer Service. So I kind of want to try to differentiate a little bit with, and again, I'm kind of dancing around. I haven't broken it down into all the details. This is a complex topic, by the way. And a lot of it's not about courtesy. It's actually about procedures and systems, okay? But I have often framed the question, you know, what differentiates good service from exceptional service? And in a way that makes logical sense, that's not simply a checklist of you do this, you do that, but is a broader framing piece about what exceptional service is. So I'm going to give you what my take is on it, and then I'll try to give you some examples, okay? So I believe that, and this is probably a redundant slide, but how do we really wow our customers? That's the question, where they're going to say, wow, that, you know, that's something, that's really extraordinary. And my answer would be giving the customer more than he or she expects. Because every customer has a certain level of expectation, even before they contact you, show up in person. And if we do something, and that is absolutely an example, giving false, later on I'm going to talk about the importance of accuracy. Don't say we can't do something if you're not sure we can. It's always best to say, I don't believe we're allowed to, let me look into it, and check. Always check, and then follow up with them. But on this broader question of giving more than people expect, and obviously we have to be realistic about what we can do, because obviously we can't do anything that's going to require hiring more staff or spending more money because we don't have it, okay? We just don't have it. So when I try to do this with organizations, I say you have to be able to work within existing resources. But you have to think about what do customers expect now and what can we do that will register for them as more. Now, of course, the better you get, the harder this gets because then they come to expect it. But that's not necessarily a bad problem. But let me just give you an example of this. Because that's where, and I certainly can give you more, but I think that will just give you a general idea of what I mean by this. Okay, so I don't remember which particular chain I went into, honestly. Whether it was Rite Aid or Walgreens or CVS, I just don't remember. But I'll tell you what my experience was. That was a more than I expected experience. And I've had it with other retail operations as well. So one of the challenges when you go into like a CVS or into a a Home Depot or a Lowe's similarly, is they have so many products that it's where is it? Where is the that I need? Okay, where is it? Right? So I went into the store. I was looking for ibuprofen, Motrin. And I asked what aisle is it, and I expected them to tell me it was in aisle 5. They didn't do that. They walked me down to where it was and pointed out where all the Advil ibuprofen was. To me, that was a wow, because it wasn't what I expected. It was more than I expected. And then my takeaway from that is that's extraordinary. And I've had that experience with my bank. I mean, they will fall over me if I look like I'm fumbling with anything. Even trying to remember my account number, they're already rushing over to try to help me. So it's more than I expect. Okay. So how many of you at least get the idea, okay, of what I'm talking about? And so I've asked departments to think about this a little bit. So I'm going to give you a little hint about where most of the areas are that you can provide more than expect. It's in the following up effective use of technology area, where, for example, when you get off the phone with somebody, you confirm what you've discussed and the action items in an email, which is actually a win-win, because you need to remember what you promised. So instead of just writing it down for yourself, confirm with them. Or sending a calendar invite. So a lot of the stuff that I'm seeing that's related to more than expect these days, that doesn't really involve a cost, really is a little bit more effective use of technology. Following up, confirming emails, sending calendar invites, sending reminders, stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? But I'm going to leave it to you to think about what, because if we went beyond just doing this training broadly, but you were actually doing it in a department, I would ask people to think about what your processes are like and what kinds of things we might be able to do that is going to register as a wow. And in almost every case, we're able to do it. As I said, it's going to get harder the better we get, but that's a problem I can live with. That we've gotten so good it's actually hard to figure out how to top ourselves. But just something to think about. Now I'm going to stop for a minute. Any questions, comments, thoughts on that? So if we're going to break down customer service into kind of the categories, or, well, maybe category is not the right word. If we're going to look at customer service as what are the elements, I would suggest that it's a 3-legged table. And those 3 legs are professionalism, accuracy, and responsiveness. And no one is more important than the other. They're all, pieces of the puzzle, okay? And so I want to kind of take some time to talk about each one in at least some detail. Whoops. I just hit the wrong button. I apologize. Okay, so what is professionalism? Professionalism is anything that's going to create the perception that we have our act together. So it's looking at whether or not we have a polished look in all points of contact. And I will tell you, although in my own business, the number of phone calls I get today are so low. I get almost none. In fact, when the phone rings, it's usually somebody trying to, like a telemarketing call. Because today, most of my clients, given the nature of the work I do, they tend to contact through email. I occasionally even get text messages, but I don't get as many phone calls. A decade ago, I got a lot. But still in school districts, depending on the department, you're still going to get a lot of calls. By the way, how many of you still get calls? And I think most of us would agree it's tapered a little bit in some cases. Yeah, depends on really where you're working, because we are having more conversations or communication through email, but and that's exactly what I would expect. Okay, but yet it's still a point of contact, as well as email and as well as our website, as well as on-site visitors and looking at all of that. Whether in all contacts, we're putting our best foot forward. And I've often said the telephone is actually the great equalizer. And I think back to when even though it doesn't matter that much anymore because I don't get a lot of calls, when I first started in business a long time ago, I used to say, some of my competitors are major corporations. I had some partners at the time, but we were relatively small, and we were competing with Dun & Bradstreet and IBM, and there was no way we were going to compete with them on, office, glass and steel office, or we were trying to compete with them on the polish of our documents, but in the beginning even that was harder, got easier over time. But the one place where we could really, be equal with them, even better, was on the phone. We could have the most professional phone greeting and the most professional demeanor, and it was actually easier for us to do it than it was for them, because to get three of us to do things consistently and in a certain way was a lot easier than getting 1,000 employees. So we actually had an advantage there. So and there was no cost associated with us other than to, polish our practices. So I ask people to think about, in all the areas where you look, do you really look your best? Okay? And with that in mind, I want to just take a minute or two and talk about the Disney concept. How many of you have been to Disneyland or Disney World? A lot, not everybody. Okay. All right, so first, just a piece of info. I'm going to talk about Disney World. It's a little different structurally than Disneyland, even though the park is the same. Just physical plant's a little bit different. But anyway, just a little, probably not even relevant information, but it drives into the story I want to tell. So did you know that Disney World, the park is actually on the second floor? When you're in the park, you're actually on the second floor, okay? And the reason for that has to do with where they built it. They built it in what is essentially swampland, okay? And so to build a basement would have been very difficult. They would have had to do what they did at the World Trade Center and do this whole concrete bathtub thing. Very hard. So the easier way, or the easier solution, was to put all the infrastructure on the ground level and then build the park above it, okay? And in fact, you get a little bit of drama as a result, because you're walking from the parking lot, and it's a slow grade up a flight. You're actually having a hill up to the, to the castle, and as you know, there are no hills in Central Florida, okay? So one of the things that Disney emphasized to its employees, and yes, it started with Walt, okay, was this idea that we are in show business, that the business of a park, it's show business, okay? And one of the things that is and that you're cast members in the show. Now, technically, not everybody is a cast member. If you never go into the park, and there are a lot of people that actually don't. If you work in HR or you're a network, computer network person, you might not ever actually go into the park when there are customers there, because you're really working behind the scenes. But for anybody, or if you, for example, they have a crew of people that clean all day long, as you can understand with all the popcorn and candy and everything else, they have to have a team, cleaning up constantly. But they also have a team that does like major cleanup during the hours that the park is closed, which vary from time of year, okay? But anyway, what they teach is anybody who has contact with customers is a cast member. Okay, And they emphasize very strongly this notion of on-stage versus off-stage behavior. So if you are off-stage, down in a lounge, and they have lounges, okay, you can certainly put your feet up. I wouldn't get too crazy, but, you can do what I call lounging activities. You can talk about, I only have 5 more years to retire, this Florida heat is killing me, I got an itch. You can do all of that, because you're in the lounge. But once you come into the park, through these little secret doors they have all over, then it's what? It's showtime, and everything is expected to be picture perfect. And because they really put such an emphasis on this, it's why so many people get the takeaway that everybody looks happy, everybody looks great, because whatever stuff might not be that doesn't get seen by customers. So I have tried with my clients to introduce the Disney concept, and with some caveats. I don't really think that we can hold it to that higher standard, but I think it's being mindful a little bit of the kinds of things we might do when customers are not around and things we might do when they are around. Like we can't afford not to look busy. Or there's some things I've said to people, look, you're on a break. Do you have the right to read a paper on a break? Of course you do. But reading a paper on a break in front of the building is, given Murphy's Law, that's just when the board president or a trustee is going to come by, and they're going to get an impression then of not just you, of your unit. So I've asked people to be kind of mindful about that. And along the same lines, particularly with large organizations, understanding that everybody is an ambassador for the organization. I'm not only responsible for the people I directly serve, but everybody. And the best example of that is the pieces and parts approach we see in some colleges, where people take the attitude, well, it's not my department, it's not my students, it's not, and you really can't take that view. Anyone that comes onto your site, you have to treat as if they're a customer of everyone. Because some of the most common things that turn people off, and they're first impression things, okay, are, my first time coming, I couldn't find the bathroom and no one helped me. Or there was bad signage, okay? In fact, I did work for an educational service center. It'd be similar to Region 10 in Texas or our BOCES in New York or PAEC, similar organizations. And I had this whole conversation about new teachers coming in because they would do regional teacher orientation. And they're all coming for their first time. And I said, their impression of your organization is going to be driven a lot by their first experience. Was it confusing, finding their way? Did the staff help me find the bathroom? Which is the most important thing, if you're going to run a site, is people being able to find where they're supposed to go and where the bathroom is, So they're going to have that good experience. And just to think about this idea, if you take a brand new teacher, not all of them, but some of those teachers in 10 years are going to be principals. And in another 10 years, some of them are going to be superintendents. So their impression of your organization may be driven by that first experience they had when they were a brand new teacher. And if it was not a good experience, then we have to unwind that. So this notion of everybody being an ambassador, very important. How many of you would agree with that? And it's hard because we've got to be able to get the whole organization on board for this stuff. So I just want to take a minute and talk about telephone greetings. I don't want to beat this horse too dead, but I do really believe, until we reach a point where we're not going to get any phone calls, that it's important that we think about telephone greetings. And I'm actually surprised to find that in many organizations there really are no standard greetings. It's like everybody does their own thing. Okay, so one of the common things I'll do when I do training is I'll actually go around the room and have everybody just say how they answer the phone. And it varies a lot from situation to situation. Sometimes there is a lot of consistency. But in a lot of cases, everybody's doing different things. Some people are giving their name, some are not. Some are giving the name of their department, some are not. And I just think it's really important to try to have a standard in this area. And so obviously there's only a recommendation, but when I meet with leaders, I say, let's see if we can establish a standard. And if we have to have some collaborative conversations to get agreement on that, I'm fine, okay? But I think it's just important to have that. Something that's going to get noticed, doesn't cost any money, let's get it right. So I'm going to pose the question too, how many of you, your organization has a standard way the phone's to be answered? Just a yes or no is good. Yeah. Okay, so what I'm hearing is some do, some don't, okay? And by the way, I realize you can't cure the world, okay? And the bigger the organization is, the more complex it is to put it together. So sometimes maybe we'll just make a decision that we'll have a standard in my department where there's only 3 of us, and then we'll let somebody else solve the problems of the world. So don't try to take on more than you can do. But there's no reason why, if you're a department of 2, you can't establish the standard, okay? So let me talk to you about what is a common standard and what it should, in my view, it should look like, okay? All right, I'm just going to skip this for a minute. Okay, so I'm the first one to admit this is a little long. I'm going to talk to you about how to shorten it after, okay, if you need to. And it depends on how many calls you get. Okay, so the first is a salutation. Good morning, good afternoon, or my favorite, thank you for calling. Why do I like thank you for calling? Because it works all day. I don't have to, you know what I mean? It works all day, okay? You don't have this problem of going, good morning, good afternoon. It's good all the time. Thank you for calling. But all of them are fine. Second, where they're calling. And here, I really feel strongly about this. I think it's important to brand your organization. Now, I know there's some norms in schools, so if it's a school building, we're not going to both give the building and the name of the district because it's just too much, okay? But I certainly think, for example, if we are working in a business office, in a district, or in a government entity, we shouldn't be answering the phone business office or clerk's office. We should be answering the phone town of Wallkill clerk's office, or White Plains business office, or Roslyn Schools business office, or Greenville County business office. So we should be including the name of the district or organization. And again, I'm trying to make sure I cover a little bit. If it's Southern Mississippi Admissions Office, that's what I mean. If it's based in a school building, the cultural norm is usually be to mention the school. So you might say Albert Leonard. This is in New Rochelle, near where I live, and I was just talking to somebody today about this. So it's Albert Leonard Middle School Guidance Department or Social Studies Department. So if it's building based, we'll mention the building and the department. If it's main office, all you have to do is mention the name. So I'm just going to again give you an example of this with one of the groups that enrolled. This is a fake name, but it's the name of one of the folks that enrolled. If anybody's here from Wallkill, I assume it's a DPW. But anyway, so it's thank you for calling the town of Wallkill Department of Public Works, DPW, is fine. Nancy Smith speaking, how may I help you? So that's an example. So I want to go back and just go over all the details. So where they're calling, and then is who are they speaking to? And I have some personal opinions regarding schools, and I just want to share it with you, and you can decide what you want to do. But one of the things that I learned in kindergarten is professional people in schools have full names. So I have traveled all over the country, worked with schools all over the place. I've never found a school where teachers weren't addressed as Mr. So-and-so or Ms. So-and-so or Mrs. We don't call teachers Ann and Susan and Jill, not with the public. And certainly we don't teach students to do that. We have a certain professional demeanor. And so my concern is if the teachers are full names and the office staff are first names, do we create a situation where we're decreasing the perception of professionalism? because you're professionals as well. You're just different profession, but you're still professional. So that's my recommendation. What I'm saying is, if everybody in a whole organization from top to bottom is Dan and Ann and Susan, I don't see any reason why you shouldn't be Dan and Ann and Susan. But if administrators and higher-ups are Mr. and Mrs. and Doctor, and teachers are Miss, and then you're Susan and Ann, you may be diminishing the public perception of you. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to tell you what to do, other than, my general recommendation that you either your last name, your full name, or your surname prefix in your last name, like Mary Smith or Jeff Olefson or Mr. Olefson. Okay. And then the last one is, how may I help you? So it's a bit long. I would say if you're really getting a lot of calls and it's a bit much, get rid of the salutation, because you can really pretty much get that in the lilt of the voice. So I could certainly, in a very pleasant voice, say, Town of Wallkill, DPW, Nancy Smith speaking, how may I help you? And that would work. And I do want to say this, you can get all the words right, but if you don't have the right personality, that's going to show. So if I'm going, Town of Wallkill, Nancy Smith speaking, what do you want? No, I'm kidding, but, it's not going to work. So you do need to think about having a positive and upbeat personality as well. By the way, a common question I get asked is, should you have a different phone greeting for internal and externals? I don't recommend that for a couple of reasons. Number one, you never know. Okay? You never know. If I'm going to go to about 2:05, because we start at 1:05. So, and I'll try to get as much done as I can. But anyway, so I want to tell you a story, because it's a worthwhile story to tell about why you have to be careful with caller ID. Okay? So the story goes like this. It was actually told to me, I don't know if we have anybody from Pennsylvania here, but it was told to me by one of the executive directors of a Pennsylvania IU. Okay? And so the story goes like this. They have various sites. Okay? And so he was at a meeting at a different site from where the central location is. He was actually at a meeting at their PD building, I believe, okay? And he was in the meeting. He needed to make a phone call, so he got out of the meeting and went over to one of the desks. And folks were at lunch. He just picked up the phone. He's the executive director. He can do what he wants, okay? He picked up the phone, and he called back to the main headquarters. And when he called back, the person on the other end, seeing her friend's name, says, "So, Ann, how was your hot date last night?" Really happened. Okay. So he knew what happened. I mean, he's somewhat of a sense of humor. Good guy, really, okay? But it's a good telling thing. So he turns around and he says, "Who's this?" And she goes, "Well, who is this?" And he goes, "It's Dr. Shively." And she almost like drops the phone, because that's like the head guy. So what's the proof here? We really don't know, when we're looking at a caller ID, exactly who we are speaking to. You could have a board member or someone else using someone's phone. Also, it's been really interesting. We've done a little research. Depends on the phone system. But sometimes if an external call goes to one person that's transferred, the caller ID will not show as an external call. It'll show it as coming from the person who transferred the call. So again, we don't know where it is. So it's best to always operate on the assumption that we don't know, and therefore default to the basic greeting. And now, by the way, if we're in the middle of giving the greeting and the person goes, "It's Ann," you can stop. We don't have to say, "Wait, I got to finish." Okay? And I'm not a fan of, I don't believe in speeches in these greetings. I've seen some ones I want to throw up, where districts talk about how wonderful they are. I had one where they go, "Thank you for calling a school of excellence in 2012, 2014. Don't give speeches. Okay? To all be Patty special sauce lettuce. Don't give speeches. My theory is, if you have to explain who, you have to say you're great, you probably stink. because most people who are good don't have to say that. Okay, so don't add any platitudinous stuff. Okay, just use a greeting that's functional. And I'm going to try to cover a little bit more. Okay, so here's just a bit of news. Probably the last story I'll tell you on this. I mean, I certainly could do hours on this topic, and maybe we'll revisit it and do a customer service too, where I can wade a little bit deeper in the weeds. But so I'll tell you the story. It's an interesting story, and it says a lot. Okay, so I got hired by an educational service center in New York, one of the BOCES. And because it's BOCES where some of the people are participating, that area, it'll remain nameless. But anyway, so they had hired me to look at why their tech department had a bad reputation. And their job largely was to support their local districts. They had a whole team of tech folks, okay? And so as I was trying to unwind some of this, the first thing I tried to do, which I always try to do, is first really look at the service they were providing and objectively determine, do they really stink or not? Okay? And I actually concluded they didn't. I mean, there were things that needed to be fixed, but they were on the level of the service delivery, the soup, they were pretty good, okay? And yet they had a bad reputation. Most of it was about some poor missteps, strategic missteps that were good because they were fixable, okay? Would have been harder the other way around. If the soup were bad, we would have had a lot more work, okay? So here's what's interesting. So I want to share this because it's intriguing. So what they did, and I didn't actually do this, they did it before I got there. They surveyed their customers. They surveyed point of contact customers, and then they surveyed the higher-ups, okay? And when they surveyed the point of contact customers, you know, they rated the department pretty good. You know, overall, when we asked them, you know, what was their experience, a lot of them really reported positive experiences. When they talked to the higher-ups, they had a very negative view. Now, if you think about that, that almost doesn't make sense. Because at one level, where would the higher-ups get their information? They'd only get it from the rank and file. I mean, they didn't have that many personal experiences, so they must have been getting it from the rank and file. So how could you have this disconnect? And the answer is because bad news travels up and good news does not. So I'm just going to give you one hypothetical for this. Okay, so let's assume that I have a tech person, and they say, I'm going to arrive at 2:15. And it's now 2:20, and they haven't arrived, right? So the person then at that point calls their principal, who in turn and it goes all the way up the chain, you know, all the way to the top, okay? And then 5 minutes later, the person arrives, and they're awesome. Not only do they do a good job, they do extra for me. I ask them for a problem like this or that, and they offer to help me. And so I walk out, I'm thrilled. I'm about to, you know, if we were allowed to do it, I might give them a kiss, but, you know, it's not kind of cool. But, you know, I'm just thrilled, right? And that's how I'm feeling about them. Yet I'm probably not going to make another call up to tell my principal or the higher-ups what a wonderful experience I had. So if you take this on a cumulative basis, then the people at the top are going to have a very different view than the people at the bottom. Does that make sense to everybody? Just give me a yes or a no if you understand what I'm talking about. Okay, so what we have to do is figure out what the trigger is for the bad news traveling up. That's the key. So, and I gave it to you here. What was the trigger for the bad news traveling up? Anybody? Correct. The trigger for the bad news showing up was being late. And by the way, it's okay to be late as long as you call. Okay? If they had texted them and said, I'm running 15 minutes behind schedule or 5 minutes, then they really wouldn't be late, right? So it isn't necessarily that they have to arrive at the time they said. There has to be a mechanism to get that information to the customer. So that sounds like an easy fix, and not so simple. So that meant that I needed to have the contact information for people in advance and anticipate what to do, or take a different approach. So we actually decided to take a different approach. We decided that what we would do is when you finished one job, you would give the people a general window. And then when you finished one job, you would call them or text them and tell them where you were and that you were on your way. Okay? So then they didn't perceive you as late. So you might text them and say, hi, I know I'm supposed to do this. I'm at JFK. I expect I'll be there within about 10 minutes. Now they're not worried. Now they don't think I'm late. And so the bad news doesn't travel up. So this is where we're going to wrap up, but I want you to just think about this notion of how often we can get a really bad reputation because we haven't thought of the triggers. And so I'll leave you with a last thought. You cannot ever miss a deadline. Can't miss a deadline. Doesn't mean you can't postpone one, but you can't miss a deadline. So when we make a promise to somebody, we have to either deliver or inform them that we're running behind, and we have to figure out how to build the infrastructure to do that. So I know I'm really over, but I'm going to give you a little tip on how to do that, and that's where we'll call it a day. Okay? So here's a tip, and you can do this whether you use Google or whether you use Outlook. It doesn't really matter. But as you know, in both Google or Google Calendar or Outlook, you can create as many calendars as you want. So I recommend that you create a commitment calendar. It's a good habit anyway because it forces you to make promises. Okay? And so anytime I talk to somebody, instead of saying I'll take care of it, I say I'll have that to you no later than Friday. And then I put it in the commitment calendar. And what you can do with these calendars, that's completely up to you, is you can set any time in advance how much in advance you want to be told. I don't think it helps you much to be told 10 minutes in advance, which would be fine with a meeting, but maybe you want to give yourself a half a day or a day, right? So let's say you put it in. It's supposed to be that you had promised on Friday. Now Thursday, up comes a notification. You go, oh, crap, I forgot about that. And then you call the person or you email them and say, we're running a little behind schedule. Well, you either hustle it up or you say, we're running a little behind schedule. I probably won't get that to you until Monday. That's how you prevent bad news from traveling up. Anyway, I want to thank you. I know I ran over a bit. And I probably could do a lot more. I assumed I probably wouldn't cover everything. And I'll see you, if any of you are doing tomorrow, I'll see you tomorrow. Okay?